Rounding toward the home stretch here. 2 more division previews left on the Athletic Football Show. We will finish things off with the AFC North tomorrow. Today, it is the NFC West. Derek, we talked about this a little bit earlier today when me, and Dave were kind of kicking around just general thoughts about this division, expectations. Every team in this division has an over-under, preseason over-under of at least 8.5, which makes the expectations for this division collectively, as we were talking about what success feels like, every team is like, you better make the playoffs. Based on how you're coming into the season, you better make the playoffs. And the only division where I think that's the same deal, where all 4 teams have that kind of discourse around them heading into the year, is probably the NFC North. And so I think that's why there is a ton of intrigue about what the NFC West ultimately looks like in 2025.
Yeah, this to me was like by far the most difficult division to nail down all of the like what is success that we're going to talk about at the end for all of these teams. Because at least with like the NFC North, that is also a pretty loaded division. But the timelines and the expectations, even if all those teams are good, felt a little clearer to me. Like with the Bears, it's like, okay, just fix Caleb and you're probably fine. Vikings, it's like if JJ's good, you're probably fine. With the entire NFC West, it feels like everything is a little bit more jumbled and complicated than that.
Dave, I'm going to say something. I'm curious if you agree with this. I think the NFC West is the most open when it comes to how many different finishes we could possibly see. Like, I think the NFC North is extremely competitive. It's hard for me to imagine a world where the Lions finished in last place in the NFC North and the Bears finished in first place. In the NFC West, it's much easier for me to imagine like virtually every single permutation of how all 4 of these teams finish. Do you think that's crazy?
No, you took the words right out of my mouth, and that's why this division is such a shot in the arm. Not to say any of the other divisions are boring, but I think there's a more established hierarchy, and especially for the NFC North. You know, like you can picture some version of the way that it goes. Like we're reasonably confident the Lions and the Packers are going to be good teams. The NFC West is just a demolition derby, man. Like you could put all 4 teams in any order you want, and maybe it's a little harder for me to see for certain teams than others, but you can paint that picture. We know the 49ers can finish 4th. They just did it. We know how south things can go for the LA Rams if they have the wrong injury issues. Their quarterback is an injury issue right now. The Cardinals and the Seahawks, there's a lot of variance there. I was going to say maybe it would be hard for me to imagine one of those teams maybe outright running away with the division, but everything else feels like it's on the table, and that's why I think this is the most compelling division in football this year, just in terms of uncertainty and intrigue.
Yeah, I think the furthest, like the most remote possibility to me is like the Cardinals winning the division and the Niners finishing in last. Like there are certain ones that are harder to picture, but I do think that there are a lot of different ways that this can go, and that's why I'm excited to dig into this. Like you mentioned, we're going to go in the same order we've gone all the divisions. We're going to go in the order they finished last season, which means the Niners are last. The fact that the Niners are getting the same treatment as like the Saints and the Raiders in this exercise is very funny, but we don't make the rules. That's how we've done every single one of these. So let's start with the Los Angeles Rams, our preview for the 2025 Rams. For each team, we're going to kick things off with their offseason in 60 seconds. Signed Devontae Adams, 2 years, $44 million. Retained left tackle Eric Jackson, 3 years, $56 million. Signed Poona Ford in free agency, 3 years, $27 million. Extended Kyron Williams, 3 years, $33 million with 23 guaranteed. Brought back Tutu Atwell, 1 year, $10 million. Coleman Shelton, 2 years, $12 million, $9 million guaranteed. Reworked Matthew Stafford's contract. Small deals for DJ Humphries and David Quisenberry. Notable draft picks, they traded out of the first round and got a future first in a deal with Atlanta. They picked Terrence Ferguson in the second round, edge Josiah Stewart in the third round, running back Jarquez Hunter in the fourth round. Lost Cooper Kupp, Bobby Brown in free agency, along with Michael Hoyt and Demarcus Robinson. Traded Jonah Jackson to the Bears. For each of these teams, we're going to kick things off with what we are excited to watch in 2025. We had the same answer for this, all 3 of us, and we were talking about it earlier today. Derek, what are you excited to watch for the 2025 Los Angeles Rams?
I mean, this is aggressive framing, but the last time this team had an X receiver like this, they won the Super Bowl. So again, it's hard to pick any team and put them in, but like the last time we saw it like this, that is what they were able to accomplish. And I think there's a couple of reasons that I'm excited for that. One, I'm still not like entirely sold on the run game. So the fact that like Devontae Adams can come in and they can maybe get back to some of that 2021, maybe being a little bit more gun and empty team, I think that's really exciting. Devontae Adams is also, like, extremely not washed. Like, he's still a very good player. Obviously, the last couple of years in terms of, like, some of his overall raw production and the way that we talk about him compared to, like, Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson has waned a little bit, but, like, he's still incredible. Like, so ESPN has their open score, which is, like, not perfect as no metric is, but there were only 8 players last year who had above a 75 open score and at least 100 targets, and it was all the guys like CeeDee Lamb and, like Mike Evans, the A.J. Brown, like, the superstar receivers, and he's still one of them. So giving that guy to Matthew Stafford next to Puka Nacua, I'm pretty hyped for what that's gonna be.
If you look at the numbers last year, just X receiver snaps, so isolated on the line of scrimmage snaps among all receivers in the NFL, 28 guys had 50 of those routes. Demarcus Robinson finished second to last among those 28 players in target share. He was targeted on 6.5% of his isolated X receiver routes last year. There was only one other guy below 14%. There has never been a more sacrificial X receiver in an offense than what Demarcus Robinson was for the Rams last year. So having a real threat there, rather than just saying we're going to stick somebody there and then work all this 3-man front side stuff that we like to do, it changes the dynamics of the offense. Now, if you're going to tilt coverage to the front side, you're going to have a backside guy that's a Hall of Fame player still playing at a decently high level. And Dave, when I was talking to people there during training camp, I think the thought was, now we have somebody that brings a skill set we have not had in the receiving corps for the last couple of years, and we still think he's going to be able to do some of these space-oriented option route stuff that Cooper Kupp was able to do. And so with the fact that you have 2 receivers now in Puka and Devontae Adams that you don't necessarily have to manufacture separation for, I think it really does change the calculus for how teams can look at game plan for this Rams offense.
I think it could just be the purest, most fun form of this team, you know? Yeah, like it's so fun to think of Sean McVay, and he still will, obviously. He's good at his job, but it's so fun to think of him not needing to scheme stuff, like just having dogs that can go up and win and just be the better player. That hasn't always been the case, which is a testament to the Rams scheme. But matching good scheme with amazing players can be really, really fun. Their division rivals up in San Francisco know all about that. So, yeah, it's simplistic to say Matthew Stafford throwing the ball to Devontae Adams is really fun, but it's one of the most fun things about this coming season. I was thinking about this. You know, Matthew Stafford's been in the league forever. Devontae Adams has too by receiver standards. A whole generation of players, like when you ask them, like, oh, who do you model your game after? Who do you love? These are the guys. Like every receiver in
Yeah.
the league is like, I looked up to Devontae Adams, and every quarterback in the league is like, I know he doesn't have as many accolades as some other guys, but Matthew Stafford is that dude. Like you hear that stuff all the time. So to see them play together, you know, I'm knocking on all the wood that they get to. Hopefully, they're obviously both a little bit older. Hopefully, we get to see 17 games of that type of connection.
I love you bringing this up because Cooper Kupp leaving this situation, you're going to lose what Cooper Kupp was as a player, but you also lose what Cooper Kupp is as like a football mind. It's actually fun talking to people in Seattle about this, just like how Cooper Kupp goes about the intellectual parts of the sport. It would be really, really hard to find someone who is on or approaching that level. They found one of those guys. Like Devontae Adams is one
Yeah.
of the most football smart people who has ever walked the planet. And I think they've really enjoyed having somebody with that level of input and insight and awareness into what the offense has been and some of the tweaks that he's even brought to it. It's actually funny. Like I heard a story during training camp where with this offense, we know there's a lot of cut splits to it, right, Derek? These are condensed formations. Well, Devontae Adams is like a true X receiver. And so there have been some moments in practice where like he just inches out a little bit further than like the actual playbook says he's supposed to. And they're kind of like, you know what? We're just going to let him do that. And so watching him kind of put his own little spin on some of the things that they like doing within this offense, and the fact that Sean McVay once again has one of these players who's going to come to him with little wrinkles on some of the stuff they should be doing based on what he's seeing, that would be really hard to replicate when Cooper Kupp leaves your building. I think they kind of did it by bringing in Devontae Adams.
That's honestly really funny to hear. Just imagining in the playbook, it says, yeah, you need to stand between the hash and the numbers. And Devontae's like, I'm going to take another step towards the numbers and give myself a little bit of space here.
That's the whole point of having players that change the calculus for you, is you allow them to do some things that maybe you wouldn't allow everybody to do.
It's very funny to think that, and you like, we know the tropes of preseason storylines. You see a different version of the same thing every year. The Rams parted ways with an all-time great receiver in their organization, a Triple Crown winner, Super Bowl MVP, and nobody in the world is like, how are they going to replace Cooper Kupp? Like, that's not a thing that anybody's talking about.
The other part of this, before we move on, just talking about the receiving core in Los Angeles, it's very easy to get excited about what Davante Adams is going to do for this offense. It's easy to forget that when he was back on the field last year, Puka Nacua led the NFL in every single advanced wide receiver metric. He was number one in the league in yards per route run. He was number one in the league in first downs per route run. Like, he was unbelievably productive, and now he's almost like an afterthought because they brought in Davante Adams. So it's not just Davante Adams, it's the fact that they already had a guy on a rate basis who was doing things with his targets that no receiver in the league was doing.
And they should fit so well together too,
Yes.
right? Like, sometimes you're like, oh, are these players redundant? Do they do too much of the same thing? Puka and Devontae should complement each other pretty perfectly, which makes it even more fun.
Yeah, Puka had a first down reception on 17% of his routes last year. That is a bigger gap than Puka from A.J. Brown to 2 to A.J. Brown and Trey McBride in 10th. Like,
Wow.
that's how dominant Puka was with just when he was on the field last year, how productive he was. The one other one I would throw out, just for like a little bit of variety here, I'm very excited to watch the front of this team. We're not talking about it anywhere else, and so I just wanted to toss that in there. I think that the individual talent they have is fantastic, obviously, like what Jared Verse was for this team last year. But I also think in terms of pass rush plans, I heard this from a lot of different defensive coaches over the month that I was traveling to camps. Just this idea of how can we make sure we're rushing together, where there's like a cohesive plan, guys are complementary to one another when it comes to stunts, games, all of that. And when you watch the Rams, I think they're the best version of this because they have guys that fill very specific roles. Like what Kobe Turner is in some of those stunts and games, both as a penetrator, his ability to like change direction. And sometimes we look at hustle sacks and we consider them negatives. When you have a guy like Jared Verse who's penetrating and crushing the pocket and moving the spot for the quarterback all the time, having somebody who has a lot of bursts and is good at those kind of cleanup sacks and change of direction plays, it's not a negative. Like, that's actually a useful skill set when you consider the other guys. And Kobe Turner's very good at that. And so watching how this group plays collectively, I think is a really good example of the best way this can go as other teams try to emulate that. And so watching what that can look like in year 2, I am very, very excited about this.
Yeah, I think when you're like only a hustle sack guy, that's a problem. But when you're a hustle sack guy on top of also being explosive yourself, that's when it becomes like a real threat to opposing offenses. I think it also helps too, like their collective ability to play together. Like these are all literally guys they drafted within the last 2 years. Like they've all learned this together. They learned the NFL together, save for obviously Puna Ford, who they brought in this year, who we will be talking about a little bit later. So
one note to keep in mind with the edge group and just how it's different than this year, because it's very easy to be like, young guys, wheels up, let's do this. Losing Michael Hoyt, I think, is a real thing to consider. They had 3 edge guys that they could really rely on last year. Now you're really kind of thrusting younger players into that role. Josiah Stewart, who they drafted in the 3rd round. So just a little bit less depth on the edge is one area where this team is probably a little bit weaker in 2025. So just something to keep in mind. And Hoyt, for all of his limitations, maybe physically, his football smarts and how good he was at getting guys lined up and just kind of helping communicate. And when you're doing all those games and stunts, you need people to kind of be at the center of that. And so losing him as part of that, I think, is just something to keep in mind. Buffalo is very excited to have that factor within their defense, and the Rams are losing it. Let's get to the swing points for the 2025 Rams, the areas where this season might pivot for LA. Dave, what do you got for me?
We can follow it like a guidebook dating back through the post Super Bowl years with the Rams. It's the offensive line. They're going to go how their offensive line goes. Matthew Stafford is going to go with how well he's protected. And like I said, you can look back on it for examples of this, because when it's bad, it's really, really bad. You guys remember the 2022 season. Rams fans, like, cover your ears. You don't want to relive that I went back and looked this up. And obviously, you're dealing with a lot of injuries, you're dealing with shuffling. The 2022 LA Rams allowed a sack on 14% of their dropback attempts.
What?
The league average was 6.5. Like unsustainable amounts of pressure. And needless to say, Matthew Stafford was done by Thanksgiving, and the Rams were terrible. Like, the most memorable thing about that Rams season was Baker Mayfield saving his career. And then over the last couple years, you've seen it steadily progress. They cut that number down to 7.8% in 2023, which was just barely over league average. Somehow, this is honestly amazing because you guys remember how much they were shuffling in the first month of last season. They cut that number down to 3.5% in 2024. The league average was 7%. And as soon as you affect the pressure numbers, Matthew Stafford is good again. Matthew Stafford is as great as his protection is going to allow him to be. It's so incredible the way the Rams stabilized their offensive line last year. You know, they had Jonah Jackson at the beginning of the year. That obviously did not work out the way they intended. You're dealing with injuries to everybody from Rob Havenstein to Steve Avila missed 7 games last year. Alaric Jackson missed time last year. And unfortunately, I'm at least a little bit worried that that can carry over into 2025, at least where Alaric Jackson is concerned. He is back on the practice field. It sounds like there's optimism he's going to be available for the season opener, but when you're missing the vast majority of training camp as a veteran player, I think that is definitely noteworthy. So if it's good, the Rams are going to be good, and if it's bad, the Rams are probably going to be really bad. I think it's basically that simple.
It really has been over the last couple of years, which is kind of crazy. But you look at the stats, and I think this is probably directionally true for most teams in the NFL. Their offensive line is bad, they will be bad.
Yeah.
But the Rams specifically, as Stafford has gotten older, I think he's just a little bit more fragile when it comes to the protection and how it affects him. I mentioned this stat on the 6 quarterback show that we did earlier this summer, but I'll use it again here because I think it's really telling. Quarterbacks with a worse EPA per dropback than Matthew Stafford when pressured last year per Next Gen Stats: Gardner Minshew, Cooper Rush, Will Levis, Joe Flacco, Spencer Rattler, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, Daniel Jones.
That's
The
not
only
great.
one of those guys, the 2 of those guys will be starting. 3 of those guys will be starters this year: Joe Flacco, Spencer Rattler, and Daniel Jones, all by default.
Yeah, those are all not
Not
those are all not
quarterback
intentional
situations,
moves, really.
yeah, that you're excited to talk about.
Yeah, every single one. And Russell Wilson will be a starter for a little while. All of those
Still,
guys
same thing.
are starters with an asterisk. When he was not pressured last year, Matthew Stafford finished 8th in EPA per dropback. So I absolutely think that the quality of the offensive line and what they're getting from that group is what drives this passing offense, and it probably will be again.
And you're right to point out, like, it is elementary that your protection is going to affect your quarterback play. But I think, as you said, Stafford is at a point in his career where it matters more to him than the vast majority of the starting quarterbacks in the NFL, certainly like franchise quarterbacks.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because he's not mobile like the other guys are. I
He's-
mean,
he's
his ability to
37 years
mitigate.
old.
Yeah, 37 years old with a back problem. We'll be getting to that in a second. Don't you worry about it. My swing point for the Rams, Derek, and you and I have talked about this a lot over the course of the summer, is what they get out of that Poona Ford, Nate Landman combo in the middle of the defense. Because there are other question marks personnel-wise on this defense, but I think what they did against the run last year, they just need to be better in that area. That's why you go out and get Poona Ford. And I feel like there were defensive coaches that were studying him this offseason, just as when they were looking at other defenses. And one of the ones I talked to, he was like, that guy's a free agent, when they were watching the Chargers. And so I do think that they think they stumbled into something here that might change what that front 7 feels like on early downs against the run. This team was bottom 10 in rushing success rate last year. They were 30th in the number of negative runs they created last season per True Media, which is really surprising when you consider the chaos they can create as a pass rushing unit. The fact that they're not doing that against the run. So if you are not consistently stout against the run and you're not creating negatives, that's a problem. We're coming at it from 2 different directions here. And so something needs to change about the complexion of this team's run defense. And they have paid Poona Ford a lot of money, and they have tapped Nate Landman as this year's off-ball linebacker du jour. Can that be enough for the run defense on this team to be better? I think that, to me, is where the defense will swing in 2025.
Yeah, like all the cool stuff with their pass rush only matters insofar as how often can they get into pass rush downs, which I talked about on an earlier show this offseason. Like, they were the worst team in the NFL at getting opposing offenses into like 3rd and 7+, which is obvious. Let the Banshees go do what they're going to do as a pass rushing unit. That was just not something that they could get to. And when they did, they were incredible. It's just if you were the worst team in the league at getting there, you're just not going to be able to unleash it. So I have a good amount of faith that Poona Ford can bring that. Like, I think he can do some of the just sit there, be a fire hydrant, take on some double teams, but he also is a fairly explosive player, and he's not going to be explosive in the way that, like, I don't know, peak Javon Hargrave is in terms of getting in the backfield, but he can get a little bit of push and really help the rest of the guys get into the backfield. The linebacker core, I'm a little bit more dubious on. You know, Spates flashed some stuff as an undrafted free agent last year, but that is kind of the extent of what I'll say there. And then Nate Landman was a guy who was let go from a Atlanta Falcons linebacker room who I don't think is very good. And Landman to me is a guy who, like, if you were trying to put together teach tape for like a high schooler, he would be great because he does do a lot of the right things. He steps the right way. His feel and zone coverage is really good. He's just always late because he just doesn't have it athletically. And I do think with as explosive as the rest of the front is, maybe they just create enough space for him to
I think that's
not
the
be a
vision.
problem. But we saw that with Roseman for a long time, and it kind of felt similar, and I didn't love that. So we'll see.
Let's get to what's keeping us up at night about the 2025 Los Angeles Rams. I don't know about you guys, but for me, it's the 37-year-old quarterback with a back injury.
Yeah, it's the 37-year-old quarterback with a back injury who they keep having to like wheel out to some fake van for most practices. I
was
don't
gonna
love
say,
that.
do we have to bring up the Airstream for this?
The toaster? Yeah, I don't love it.
When I see the mobile back repair unit on the Rams property, yeah, that's gonna be in my head for the rest of the year.
And I think more than that, it's like some of the instances where Sean McVay is like, "Oh, Matt was walking around practice today. He was looking good." I'm like, walking around? He's gonna get hit by Nick Bosa 10 times this year.
As a man who was 37 until yesterday and is now 38, I sympathize with where Matthew Stafford is right now. I do not have to make it through an entire NFL season while, even if the offensive line is good, taking 4 or 5 shots in the ribs a game. So this is absolutely where my anxieties lie with the Los Angeles Rams. I will say this. Dave mentioned that 2022 season. We're not there anymore. Because as disappointing of an option as Jimmy Garoppolo might be if he was your $20 million a year starting quarterback, he is a serviceable option as your backup quarterback. Devontae Adams may have some thoughts
I
on
was gonna
that.
say,
But
I mean-
in most situations, if you had to go to Jimmy Garoppolo as your backup, you'd feel okay about that. But we discussed this in the Seat at the Table show we did a couple weeks ago. This isn't about making it through the regular season as like a frisky 9 or 10 win team. Those are not the aspirations that this team has. So even if you can get to the end with Jimmy Garoppolo and be consistently competitive, you are not a championship contender with Jimmy Garoppolo as your quarterback. And I think that's where this team wants to be, Dave.
I would never dream of wishing for this to happen because I want to watch Stafford as often as possible, but I'm just stuck on the idea of the news cycle if Jimmy G has to step in for 2 or 3 weeks to save this team's season. That would be very entertaining. I don't want it to happen, but that is a fascinating little wrinkle of Jimmy G and Devontae Adams potentially reuniting to keep the Rams season on the tracks. Let's just hope that doesn't happen.
He would throw Puka Nacua 20 balls a game. Like, he would not even look Devontae's way.
I'm just going to pray that we don't have to deal with that reality.
We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but if you're trying to make the optimistic case for why it would look different for Jimmy, I mean, he played well last year when they had him play in Week 18. The entire difference is when he was in there's so much irony here because he started his career in this offensive system. The Raiders' offensive system with Josh McDaniels is significantly different than what he is asked to do as a passer for the Rams and the Niners. If you put Jimmy in like a pure progression offense where it's like, all right, Jimmy, we're going to start to the left. We're going to come all the way back to the right. If you see a guy who's open, throw him the ball. He can actually do that. Like, he's actually pretty good at that and does that pretty efficiently. In with the Raiders, it was, all right, Jimmy, based on whether or not you think this is man or zone or whether you think this is 1 high, 2 high, you need to pick a side based on that. And then his brain just got fried on the way to the answer. And so I do think McVay believes that if you put him in a system where all you're asking him to do is point and shoot based on who the open guy is, he has shown an ability to do that. But that doesn't mean I have to be excited about that version of it when we know what the Matthew Stafford version looks like.
I just think this is going to be a season. It reminds me, I covered the 14 season where Tony Romo was taking every Wednesday off of practice, and it was just a weekly
Mm.
prayer to hope that his back was okay. And I feel like the Rams are probably in for that type of season, even if there's no like major injury. It's how many hits did you take? How much time do you need to get yourself right by Friday? I think it's gonna be an anxious way to live if I had to guess. Hopefully, it's not worse than that, but that's just the realities of having a 37-year-old quarterback.
Derek, what's keeping you up at night about the Rams?
Yeah, my other one is, and I've realized this is a theme for me. This is something I bring up with a lot of teams. The corners are not good enough to me. I kind of like the safeties on this team actually. Like Cam Curl is a guy that I enjoy as like a B-minus level player. Like I think he can do a lot for you and play in the box. Cameron Kinches is like I don't know what the ceiling for him is, but I did think that he played pretty well as a third round rookie last year. So that safety duo I'm fine with. The corner room, especially on the outside of like Akello Witherspoon and Darius Williams, just doesn't really move me. Those are to me two guys who like if they're your third corner and got to come off the bench to play like 3-4 games at a time, that's great. When they're the two guys you're walking into the season with as like your 1 and 2 starters, I get a little bit dubious of that.
I was really hoping they'd do a little bit more at that spot. I think
Yeah.
they took on Emmanuel Forbes. It's kind of like a pet project experiment to see what they could get out of him, which I completely understand. Like Emmanuel Forbes is one of the most I can fix that guy. He was a first round pick. Let's see what we could do players of all time. And so I think that's been a little bit of a curiosity for them this offseason. I did hope they do a little bit more at outside corner. Other than that, I think that the safety room is good. Quentin Lake can kind of be that big nickel for
Mhm.
you. And that's a serviceable group. I think Cam Kitchens will be better this year. Here is the optimistic spin I'm going to give you, Derek. I think this team, especially on third down, which is where you would be a little bit afraid of these guys holding up, had a good formula for how they can protect them. On third down last year, when this team played man coverage, they actually had a bottom 5 blitz rate and were 12th in success rate when they did not blitz. And part of the reason that they accomplished that is that on third down last year, they played 6 or more DBs on 60% of their snaps. This was a dime team, unlike almost any team in football except for the Vikings. And in those looks against man coverage, they can give help to everybody. They did a lot of like One Roberts stuff where both of the safeties are free. And so they're accounting for having guys on the outside corner that you wouldn't love in one-on-one matchups, and they were able to hold up in those situations pretty well. So it was either that, where we're giving a lot of additional help to these guys just to make us feel a little bit better, or if we're bringing 5, we have the best pass rush in football. So when they blitzed on third down last year, they had the second highest pressure rate in the league. It was 64% of
Oh my
dropbacks,
god.
and they were 5th in success rate on those plays. So it's either we're not going to blitz and use extra bodies in coverage playing a ton of dime, or we have the best blitz plan in football, and we are not going to make those guys cover quite as long. They're not good answers, but I think if I'm trying to find the silver lining here, those are the answers that I would land on.
It's something, and I will admit that I think part of my contention with a lot of these secondaries is like in my ideal world, you can just man up and play whenever you want to, and like the reality is most secondaries can't do that. And
Yeah,
this
how
is
many
just
teams can actually do that is
not
the answer, is the question.
not a whole lot, but this is one of the like the lower teams in my end of like if you really had to do that in like a playoff environment, I'm pretty scared of what Akello Witherspoon running 30 yards down the field with someone looks like.
Okay, I would like to say I have an irrational amount of love for Akello Witherspoon. I'm not trying to convince
I
you that
love
he's like a
him
good player.
for what he
To your
is.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like the problem is not Akello Witherspoon, it's that the Rams don't have at least one better corner on the roster. Like
Yes.
if he was the other guy, if he was CB2 and a better player was CB1, I'd be like, yeah, this is fine. He can, he's going to get beat, but he'll make a couple plays over the course of the year. It's the fact that he's probably your best corner that makes this scary.
Their answer of we're going to solve the problems with the front is an answer I'm willing to accept as we get to Labor Day weekend because I have to choose to believe it. What are we watching over the first month of the season, Dave, for the Los Angeles Rams?
Well, we just wrote an ode to Devontae and Puka, which is kind of how this goes with the Rams. Like that's what we focus on, and rightfully so. But I'm really intrigued by the non-marquee skill players on the Rams roster because it's not necessarily just Puka and Devontae and a bunch of scrubs. Like Tyler Higbee is back from injury. Last year was basically a wash for him, and obviously they used a second-round pick on Terrence Ferguson. So that right there is two pretty intriguing tight ends, particularly the rookie, because I've heard so much about how they like him. And then obviously they just paid Kyron Williams, which he's good for what he is. I don't think anybody thinks of him as like a super big play threat, but they've spent big time draft picks on Blake Corum and Jarquez Hunter in the last couple of years. And so I'm just curious what the hierarchy here is. Like at the end of the day, the vast majority of the targets are probably going to come from the two headliners, but there's a lot of room for intrigue and fun stuff that Sean McVay can do because they got guys elsewhere on this depth chart behind those two receivers.
I'll believe that Sean wants to use a second running back when I see it. So
That's a valid point, but
Oh.
they keep drafting him though. They keep
When it-
doing
Insurance,
it.
baby. Insurance.
When it comes to the workload for the running backs, I assume they want to divvy it up a little bit more. Kyrie Williams got 316 carries last year and played like a vast majority of the snaps in 16 games. So that to me is like a let's wait and see. The receivers, I'm very curious about this.
Yeah.
The Tutu Atwell part of it, I do think that not having, when you have Cooper Kupp and Tutu Atwell, and you have two guys that you kind of have to manufacture space for and put in motion in order to help create that space. It's hard to do when you have two of them. Now you have one guy that you have to keep in motion to make sure that you're giving him access consistently. And so I do think that allows them to weaponize Atwell because of Devontae Adams in a way that they really couldn't before. And then the Terrence Ferguson part of this, Derek, I think that is where hopefully you can make up a little bit of the gap with the blocking that you're losing from Cooper Kupp. Because if you look at some of Cooper Kupp's best moments last year, it's him running the seam. And that's exactly what you could potentially get from Terrence Ferguson is kind of like a vertical F tight end type player. And so them being in a little bit more 12 personnel, they say it's the same thing with diversifying the running backs. We hear it every summer that it's going to happen. I do actually think with Tyler Higbee and Colby Parkinson being those inline guys and Ferguson being able to step in for you with some of the Cooper Kupp stuff, this might be the year where we actually see the 12 personnel uptick for the Rams.
I hope so, because anyone who watched our draft show knows that I love Terrence Ferguson. And like Devontae Adams is not replacing Cooper Kupp. I think we need to get that in our head. Like it's a completely separate role. They're replacing Cooper Kupp in the aggregate with guys like Terrence Ferguson and potentially like Jordan Whittington. Like I think if you want to have three receivers on the field and be a little bit heavier with Whittington and have him block, now you can just have Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams like just win on the outside. And I think that can be really valuable. And then again, Ferguson is like, he's not the biggest guy, and he's probably going to be just okay as a blocker, but god damn, he is an athlete, man. And I'm really, really excited to see what that might look like in a Sean McVay offense, whether that's down the seam, some of these crossers. We've seen at times like Sean McVay really put up a really good tight end screen game for Higbee, and I wonder if maybe Ferguson can eat into some of that because he's a really good athlete. Like I'm just, between Whittington and Ferguson, I'm excited to see how like they kind of eat into what the former Cooper Kupp role was.
The last thing I'll say about the receiving core, just one of the elements where Devontae Adams is going to be important. The Rams finished 6th from the bottom in EPA per dropback against man coverage last year. The only teams that were worse than them were the Browns, the Giants, the Patriots, the Titans, and the Colts. Devontae Adams is your answer to that because that is where Devontae Adams can make teams pay. And so I think there are a lot of layers to what the offense can potentially be because he is there this year. Dave, what does success look like for the 2025 Los Angeles Rams?
We said it at the top. This whole division, the answers to these questions are very interesting. And I think the Rams are simultaneously in a really good spot, but a really scary spot, right? Because they're set up well for the future. But Matthew Stafford turns 38 the day before Super Bowl 60. How poetic. Matthew Stafford turns 38 the day before a Super Bowl that's happening in the 49ers stadium. I think when you have a quarterback as good as Stafford, who is as close to the end of his career as Stafford with this type of talent around him, I mean, maybe it's harsh to say Super Bowl or bust, but I think success is a real run through the playoffs, like NFC title game type of run where you are one of the last teams standing and potentially get to the final game. And like I said, there's a lot of stuff to like about this team beyond the present, but you don't know how much longer Matthew Stafford's going to be part of it. That's not, tomorrow is not guaranteed with that. So I think if you don't maximize the last year or two that he has left, I think you got to view that as a disappointment.
Yeah, you have to make a run with the way that this team is built, with the way that the front is built, with the way that you invested in Devontae Adams. Like, you kind of have to make a run. Now, them failing this year, they are more okay with that than most other teams because of the first round pick and all that stuff and how young the defense is. So failure for them is not as catastrophic as it might be for other teams, but that doesn't mean that it like lowers the bar for them. The bar is still, you probably should be at the Final Four, and so that's kind of what I'm expecting from them.
I have the NFC title game because when you have a 37-year-old Matthew Stafford and you sign 32-year-old Devontae Adams, it's not a win later move. Like, you are trying to win this year. You're trying to push your chips in. And if they don't do it, they have not compromised their future because of the extra draft capital. They have $80 million in cap space next year. When they do have to eventually hit that soft reset, they'll be able to do it, and I think smoothly do it in a way that other teams might not be able to. But that doesn't change what the ambitions for this year are, and I think those are championship level ambitions.
Yeah, the idea that an extra first round pick could help you find your quarterback of the future is super exciting. And this sounds like such a fun year to be a Rams fan because the current team is going to give you a shot and you can like root against the Falcons if you want to. Like, you get to watch how good the first round pick is going to be when it's all said and done. But potentially finding your quarterback of the future, who in your wildest dreams is as good as Matthew Stafford, like, that doesn't lessen the urgency of trying to get over the hump one last time before one of the best quarterbacks of the last 20 years finally retires.
Amen. Thanks for watching the Athletic Football Show. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with us. Like and comment on this video, and we'll see you next time.